In January of 2022, FTX was valued at $32 billion. Its founder was being compared to John Pierpont Morgan, a 30-year-old who slept on a beanbag chair beside his desk and told the world he was only getting rich so he could give the money away. Stadiums carried his company's name. Super Bowl audiences watched his commercials. Members of Congress praised his vision for the future of finance. 10 months later, the exchange was bankrupt. Roughly $8 billion in customer money could not be accounted for, and Sam Bankman-Fried was on his way to becoming one of the most infamous names in the history of American financial fraud. The empire took about 3 years to build. It came apart in 8 days. To understand how, you have to start well before the collapse, with a young man who seemed, by every conventional measure, unusually principled. Sam Bankman-Fried was born in 1992 on the campus of Stanford University, the son of 2 law professors. He studied physics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and by his own account was less interested in the science than in a philosophical movement he encountered there, effective altruism, the idea that a person should use careful reasoning to do the greatest possible good for the greatest number of people. For an ambitious student, the movement offered a striking career path known as earning to give. Instead of joining a charity, you go where the money is, earn as much as you possibly can, and donate it. After graduating in 2014, Bankman-Fried took a job at Jane Street Capital, a quantitative trading firm in New York, and told colleagues he was there to fund the causes he believed in. In 2017, he left to start something of his own. The firm was called Alameda Research, a deliberately bland name chosen, he later said, in part because banks were wary of opening accounts for anything with the word crypto in it. Alameda's first famous trade exploited a simple inefficiency. Bitcoin was selling for more in Japan than in the United States. Buy in one market, sell in the other, and the gap, at times around 10%, was nearly free money for anyone who could actually move funds between the two countries fast enough. It was operationally brutal, a maze of banks, wire limits, and regulations, but Alameda made it work, and by early 2018 the firm had reportedly extracted profits in the tens of millions of dollars. Inside the small world of crypto trading, Sam Bankman-Fried now had a reputation. In 2019, he founded FTX, a cryptocurrency exchange built in Hong Kong with his MIT friend Gary Wang, a quiet programmer who wrote most of the platform's code. FTX was aimed at professional traders, fast and sophisticated, and it grew at a remarkable pace. The exchange also created its own token, called FTT, which functioned something like loyalty points and something like stock, and whose price, crucially, FTX itself, had every incentive to support. Remember that token. It will matter later. By 2021, according to internal financial documents later reported by CNBC, FTX was generating over $1 billion in annual revenue. Then came the marketing, at a scale crypto had never seen. FTX paid $135 million for the naming rights to the Miami Heat's arena. Tom Brady and Stephen Curry became brand ambassadors. A Super Bowl commercial starring Larry David told viewers not to miss out on the next big thing. Major League Baseball umpires wore the FTX logo on their uniforms. Some of the most respected investors in the world, Sequoia Capital among them, put money in, and by January of 2022, FTX was valued at $32 billion. Bankman-Fried, who had been the second largest donor to Joe Biden's 2020 campaign, was now testifying before Congress about how crypto should be regulated. He was, in the eyes of Washington and Wall Street alike, the responsible adult in a chaotic industry. By then, the company had moved its headquarters to the Bahamas, where Bankman-Fried and his inner circle lived together in a $30 million penthouse at a resort called Albany. The circle was small and strikingly young. Gary Wang, the co-founder, Nishad Singh, the director of engineering, and Caroline Ellison, a former Jane Street trader who now ran Alameda Research and who was at times romantically involved with Bankman-Fried. To outsiders, it looked like a commune of brilliant idealists working impossible hours to give their fortunes away. The reality, prosecutors would later argue, and a jury would later confirm, was very different. Here is where the rot set in, and where the story stops being about ambition and starts being about deception. FTX and Alameda Research were presented to the public as separate companies. FTX was the neutral exchange. Alameda was just another trading firm that happened to use it. In reality, the two were financially entangled from the beginning. In the exchange's early days, customers who wanted to send money to FTX were often wiring it to bank accounts controlled by Alameda, including one under an obscure entity called North Dimension. And deep in the exchange's code, there was something customers could not see. Gary Wang later testified that, at Bankman-Fried's direction, he wrote special rules for Alameda's account. It could hold a negative balance, and it was effectively exempt from the automatic liquidation that applied to everyone else. In practice, Alameda had a secret, nearly unlimited line of credit, drawn from FTX customer deposits. That borrowed money went almost everywhere except where customers thought it was. According to trial evidence, billions of dollars flowed out of Alameda into venture investments, into roughly $300 million of Bahamian real estate, into stadium deals and endorsements, and into more than $100 million in political donations from Bankman-Fried and other executives. Insiders received enormous personal loans, more than $2 billion in total, according to records presented at trial. On paper, it could all be framed as aggressive investing. In substance, as a jury would eventually find, it was other people's money. What makes this part of the story so unsettling is not that anyone set out on day one to run a heist. It is how gradually intelligent people talked themselves into it. Bankman-Fried was famous for his devotion to expected value, the gambler's arithmetic, in which a large enough payoff justifies almost any risk. In one interview, he suggested he would accept a coin flip that could double the world's happiness or destroy it, as long as the math favored the flip. Inside his companies, that mindset met an almost total absence of guardrails. There was no meaningful board of directors. There was no chief financial officer. Record-keeping was so thin that the corporate cleanup team would later struggle to produce a simple list of employees. Communications ran through messaging apps set to automatically delete. Caroline Ellison would later say she felt dread as the balance sheet deteriorated. And kept going anyway, because the man she reported to and believed in kept telling her the math worked out. The turning point came in the spring of 2022, when the broader crypto market collapsed. The failure of the Terra Luna stablecoin system in May wiped out tens of billions of dollars and dragged down lenders and funds across the industry. Alameda had borrowed heavily, and as panicked, lenders began recalling their loans. The firm did not have the money. Ellison later testified that Bankman-Fried directed her to repay those lenders using funds that ultimately came from FTX customers. Through the summer and into the fall, the exchange looked, from the outside, like a fortress. Buying up distressed competitors, its founder hailed as the industry's lender of last resort. The fortress was hollow. On November 2, 2022, the crypto news outlet CoinDesk published a story built on a leaked document, Alameda's balance sheet. It showed roughly $14.6 billion in assets. And the single largest holding was FTT, the token FTX itself had created. The trading firm's solvency rested on a token its sister company could print. 4 days later, Changpeng Zhao, the head of the rival exchange Binance, announced that Binance would sell its entire FTT position worth over $500 million. What followed was a bank run at digital speed. Customers pulled an estimated $6 billion from FTX in 72 hours. On November 8th, the exchange froze withdrawals. Binance briefly signed a letter of intent to acquire FTX, then walked away a day later after looking at the books. On November 11, 2022, FTX filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and Sam Bankman-Fried resigned. That same night, hundreds of millions of dollars drained out of the exchange's wallets in an apparent hack, deepening the chaos. The filings would eventually point to more than 1 million creditors. The man appointed to run the wreckage, John J. Ray III, had overseen the liquidation of Enron. In his first report to the court, he wrote a sentence that has already entered corporate history. Never in his career had he seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. Bankman-Fried spent the following weeks doing something his lawyers surely dreaded, talking. In interviews and at a New York Times event, he denied trying to commit fraud, describing catastrophic mistakes rather than crimes. On December 12, 2022, he was arrested in the Bahamas at the request of the United States government, which had indicted him on fraud and conspiracy charges. Extradited to New York, he was released on a $250 million bond to his parents' home in California, until August of 2023, when a federal judge revoked his bail, finding he had likely attempted to tamper with witnesses, in part by sharing Caroline Ellison's private writings with a reporter. The trial began in Manhattan in October 2023, before Judge Lewis Kaplan. The government's case rested on documents, spreadsheets, code, balance sheets, and on 3 witnesses who knew the truth firsthand, Ellison, Wang, and Singh, each of whom had pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate. Ellison told the jury that Bankman-Fried had directed her to commit the crimes she pleaded guilty to. Wang walked jurors through the code that gave Alameda its secret privileges. Bankman-Fried took the stand in his own defense, a rare and risky move, and told jurors he had made mistakes but never intended to steal. Under cross-examination, by some counts, he answered that he could not recall more than 140 times. On November 2, 2023, 1 year to the day after the CoinDesk article, the jury deliberated for under 5 hours and found him guilty on all 7 counts. On March 28, 2024, Judge Kaplan sentenced Sam Bankman-Fried to 25 years in federal prison and ordered him to forfeit just over $11 billion. The judge said he had testified falsely on the stand and described the risk that he might one day attempt something similar again as significant. The people around him met different fates. Caroline Ellison, whose cooperation prosecutors praised as extraordinary, was sentenced to 2 years. Gary Wang and Nishad Singh, who also cooperated, avoided prison entirely. Ryan Salame, a senior executive who did not cooperate and pleaded guilty to campaign finance and money transmitting charges, received 7.5 years. Bankman-Fried appealed, arguing his trial had been unfair. On June 12, 2026, a 3-judge panel of the Second Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously upheld both the conviction and the sentence, writing that the evidence against him was, conservatively stated, robust. According to public reporting, he has also petitioned for presidential clemency. As of today, he remains in a federal prison in California, not eligible for release until 2044. And yet the strangest chapter may be the epilogue. The bankruptcy estate, selling off investments and recovering assets, eventually announced it expected to repay customers with interest, based on what their accounts were worth on the day of the bankruptcy. It sounds like a happy ending, and in dollar terms it is nearly unheard of. But those claims were frozen at November 2022 crypto prices near the bottom of the market. A customer whose Bitcoin was trapped on FTX watched from the sidelines as its price multiplied. They got their money back. They did not get back what it would have become. That is the legacy of FTX, not just the $8 billion hole, but the demonstration of how far charisma, credentials, and a story about doing good can carry a company past every safeguard. Because the safeguards, it turned out, were never really there. The investors never demanded a board seat. The regulators arrived after the collapse. The money that was supposed to save the world was, in the end, simply other people's. If this story stays with you the way it stays with us, consider subscribing. The next case is already on the desk.